Panada started in 1984 as a very small group of Asian and Asian American women enrolled in the graduate theological institution or working in ministry in the United States. And this year we are celebrating 40 years of Panadam as a transnational feminist network. So it's a joy and honor to be here and to welcome you all. Today's public-facing webinar themed Resisting Binaries, Doing AAPI Feminist Public Theology is supported by the Lucy Foundation. I am eager to hear from our panelists. It is a autumn harvest season, and we are here to harvest the work of this amazing, brilliant people on how they have engaged with AAPI feminist public theologies and their critical insight and strategies to expand the scope of feminist public theology across critical difference, dismantling binary logic. We have in our panelists Mina Cho, who is a writer, researcher, and educator specializing in constructive theology and Christian spirituality in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at Georgetown University. Her work critically engages feminist and post-colonial theories, the Christian mystical tradition, and Asian American religion, spirituality, and politics. She focuses on the complex dynamics of conflict, negotiation, and reconciliation between the spirituality of vulnerable and marginalized Christian individuals and the public or institutional representation of religion and theology. Through this lens, she explores how personal faith interacts with broader theological structures, aiming to highlight the voices and experience of those often excluded from traditional religious narrative. Thank you so much, Mina Cho, for joining us. Our next panelist is SueAnn. She is a Taiwanese American musician, filmmaker, community organizer, ethnomusicologist, queer Christian pastor, and public theologian. Her 2016 documentary, Quan Tao, follows her journey along a 2-week bike trip around Taiwan. She released her album of reclaimed hymns, A Liturgy for the Perseverance of the Saint in 2018. I recommend you all to listen to that. It's on the Spotify. I love that. I love her work. And in addition to her own creative and theological works, she collaborates with others in a variety of capacity as a producer, writer, creator of liturgy, and is a member of the leadership team and editorial board of Taiwan's New Bloom magazine. She has a BPA in music business, Chinese from Belmont University, a MA in musicology from National Taiwan University, and is currently pursuing MDiv and MACF from Princeton Theological Seminary and ordination in the Presbyterian Church, USA. Thank you, SueAnn, for joining us. Our next panelist is Kai Nu, who is a writer and a PhD student at University of Michigan in anthropology and history. They have written for publications such as The Revealer, Religion and Politics, The Guardian, Vice, and Asian American Writers Workshop. They serve as a board member of Transmission Ministry Collective, a nonprofit for transgender Christian. They received their MA from Yale Divinity School. Thank you so much, Kainu, for joining us. Our next panelist is Laura Matiko Cheifetz. She is a biracial Asian American queer ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church. Her activism centers around intersectional racial justice, queer inclusion, international peacemaking effort, and reproductive justice. She has served in the theological education, social justice advocacy, religious publication, and is one of the pastors at Sunnyvale Presbyterian Church. Laura is a graduate of North Park University, MBA, MD from McCormick Theological Seminary, and BA in Sociology from Western Washington University. She is the author, co-author, and editor of Church on Purpose, Reinventing Discipleship, Community, and Justice, and co-editor and contributor to Race in America, Christian Response to Crisis. She also has contributed and co-op to CNN a piece entitled Being Asian American Means Living in a Country That Treats You as a Perpetual Foreigner in 2021. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us. And our final panelist is Angie Hong. She is a writer, public theologian, speaker, and worship leader serving as the director of educational program at Leadership Education at Duke Divinity. She is the co-author of Kinship Commons, a liturgy company that creates experiential and transformative gathering toward the flourishing of marginalized people. Angie was formerly a creative director at the Chicago campus of Willow Creek Community Church and has led worship for various churches and conferences, such as the annual Christian Community Development Association, the Justice Conference, and the Duke Divinity School Summer Institute for Reconciliation. She has written for The Atlantic, Chalkbeat, Christianity Today, and Faith and Leadership. And she received her MDiv at Duke Divinity School. Thank you so much, Angie, for joining us. We have a brilliant panelist today. And to continue our conversation, I think I want to invite all the panelists to take some time to discuss maybe some of the harm caused by the binary framework and share some of the critical API feminist response to it, how you are engaging in your own work. So I give you time to talk about that.
Esther, could you repeat maybe, and is that for everybody? Everybody you just mentioned? Thanks. Okay, great. Can you just repeat perhaps?
Yes,
Thanks.
yes. I was just saying, like, maybe you all can take some time to speak about challenging binaries in your own context and in your own work, and how are you examining it, and what are the contributions of the AAPI feminist work in this moment that you see.
Esther, you mean besides our presentation, do you want us to share just, our work first, or I think I'm a little bit confused. Because I'm the first one to go, so do I need to just go and share my presentation, or?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can go ahead and start the presentations.
All right. Thank you so
Sorry
much.
that I was not clear. Sorry. Yeah.
And I was just confused. I think it's just me. Thank you, Esther. I mean, yeah, you are really hardworking moderator. I mean, a passionate introduction. I was so moved. And thank you so much for inviting me to this to panel discussion. And it's my pleasure to share my thought with all of you. So I have a PowerPoint slides, and nothing very serious, but just wanted to share, some images. So can you see the slides, everyone? Okay. All right. So I'll try to make in 9 minutes. By the way, I'm Mina Chu. So these photos I took from Okinawa and Dongducheon during summer. So this summer, I visited Dongducheon, South Korea, and Okinawa, Japan, to research how migration and shifting international dynamics shape and reshape the camp towns around the U.S. military base in both places. So as you probably know well, these regions carry the complex legacies of imperialism, nationalism, and militarism, and classism, and further exacerbated by neoliberal market forces these days. So at the center of this transformation are migrant workers and women in the sex trade, often ignored or exploited. So their lives embody ongoing struggles for survival, resistance, and adaptation. So the lived realities of vulnerable communities highlight the limitations of binary frameworks that categorize them into fixed identities. Focusing on any single identity or moral framework, whether Okinawan or mainland Japanese, American or Korean, North or South Korean, global South or global North, oversimplifies and overlooks the intricate ways these experiences intersect. To truly understand their experiences, we must examine the intersections of nationality, race, class, and gender identity, while also moving beyond the simplistic victim-perpetrator framework. AAPI women, especially theologians and ministers, I believe stand at these intersections. Our experiences offer invaluable insights into how fluid and interconnected identities can foster more meaningful engagement with the world. Then I returned to the US, and I found myself immersed in the evolving political climate, with Kamala Harris naming Tim Walz as her running mate. So seeing Harris, a woman and the first person of Asian heritage, running for president, was both inspiring and historic. Yet, the haunting realities of the camp towns in South Korea and Okinawa remained with me, prompting me to question whether political hope alone can address global injustices. Both political parties, Republican and Democrats, rely heavily on binary thinking, framing issues as us versus them, safety versus threat, or order versus chaos. This binary lens simplifies complex issues and often ignores the voices of vulnerable communities both inside and outside the USA, including AAPI women. AAPI women know firsthand the dangers of such reductive thinking. Whether Democrat or Republican, both parties focus their rhetoric on American interests as the upcoming presidential election unfolds during a global crisis. The political message from both campaigns reinforces binary thinking on key issues. So geopolitically, with wars in Europe and the Middle East, and alliances between Russia, China, and Iran, candidates simplify diplomacy into ally versus adversary. Economic policies continue to prioritize US interests, further deepening inequality in the global South, with the promises of American benefits or the idea that US can save the world. Trade is often presented as a win or lose scenario, which increases divisions between nations. Environmental policy is similarly framed in this binary terms, with the climate crisis hitting vulnerable population hardest, yet often presented as a choice between economic development and climate responsibility. Meanwhile, there is little discussion about the damage caused by the massive global corporations, many of which are based in the US. I was also struck by how much political binaries rely on religious rhetoric. Both Republicans and Democratic conventions often resemble revival gatherings, using apocalyptic themes and invoking divine authority to rally support. This kind of language stifles critical thinking by framing issues in absolute terms, good versus evil, and reduces complex topics like race, immigration, and international conflicts to overly simplistic narratives. End-time rhetoric, for instance, invokes a sense of doom to galvanize supporters, while leaders often claim a divine mandate for their actions. Trump, in particular, has used this rhetoric to justify anti-democratic actions. Additionally, white supremacy and Christian nationalism continue to shape political identity, forces that will likely persist regardless of the election outcome. This religious rhetoric also excludes vulnerable communities by forcing them into reductive categories, either as problems to solve, groups to exploit, or strangers to expel. AI feminist public theologians are uniquely positioned to challenge binary thinking and foster more nuanced, inclusive dialogue, navigating multiple identities through culture, language, teaching, ministry, and everyday life. AAPI women can bring crucial insights into the intersections of faith, justice, and global realities. Our work, whether in education, writing, ministry, social justice advocacy, or community engagement, pushes beyond the limits of binary frameworks and encourages deeper conversations. This is grounded in our lived experiences at the intersections of diverse identities and transnational relationships, shaped by our cultural heritage and historical memories. So I propose two key tasks for feminist public theology. First, engaging with the communities and cultivating attentive listening. First, feminist public theology must bridge the gap between academia or ministry and the lived experiences of people. This requires employing diverse approaches like critical race theory, which exposes how both political and religious rhetoric conceal systematic racism and oversimplify people's experiences. Decolonial critique, which challenges rigid colonial and hierarchical categories, emphasizing fluid identities and interconnected struggles for justice. And transnational feminism, which resists American-centric binaries and acknowledges the diverse realities of women across the world, including AAPI communities. Secondly, to engage with the communities effectively, feminist public theology must cultivate contemplative listening, paying close attention to the individuals whose lives are at such intersections. A contemplative approach within and outside the faith communities is essential, I believe. We need to quiet our own voices to truly hear the murmurs of those whose voices often go unheard. Strategic silence, far from being passive, serves as a powerful tool for reflection, resistance, and solidarity, renewing our genuine accountability. By posing the tendency to prioritize our own agendas, we can engage more deeply with the complex realities and counter the binary-driven noise of political and religious rhetoric. This practice fosters understanding, builds solidarity, and empowers us to transcend the binary thinking, moving toward meaningful change. AAPI women are not just witnesses to these realities. We are leaders. Through our work in theology and ministry and community activism, we show that real transformation requires more than rejecting the status quo. It demands engaging with the world in ways that honor complexity, embrace interconnectedness, and create space for new possibilities. Thank you, everyone. Okay, I'm gonna.
Thank you so much for that. And people, this is such an wonderful offering. And please, I forgot to mention, please post your questions in the Q&A box. We will be taking questions and having conversation after we give time to each panelist to share their initial remark. I invite our next panelist, Laurel, to share some of her thoughts on resisting binaries and what are the framework that an AAPI feminist can offer to reimagine identities or our lived experience that honors the multiplicities of our lived experience.
Thank you for the invitation to be with you all and to think a little bit about this with you. And thank you, of course, to Dr. Cho for going first. We appreciate that. So when I think about some of these questions that were raised, I always think of how Asian American feminist theology has really given a sort of series of permissions, but also ways of thinking that have pushed my own capacities and thinking beyond binaries. I still fall into binary thinking occasionally. And that I also have drawn on a lot of anti-racism work. So I will say that I am biracial Asian American. My dad's family is white Jewish. My mother's family is Japanese American. We've all been here for over 100 years. And something that I found really helpful in Asian American feminist theology, because my family came here and then we were just here, is how so much of feminist theology really revealed the diasporic nature of the Asian American community, the broader community among Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And that has been very helpful to me. And I think that was one of the early times that the binary was a little bit busted for me, because in my family, you came on a boat and then you stayed. There was not very much going back and forth. My family does not fly back and forth. Just the transportation available at the time and the way that World War II really cut things off just meant that we were there and now we were here. And so I actually appreciate knowing more about diasporic feminist theologies. That really helped kind of disrupt a few things for me. So wanted to say that first. And I think of binary thinking as a white supremacist way of thinking. And to resist the binary is to resist white supremacy, which is one of my favorite things. So whenever I stop myself, I'm like, I'm fighting white supremacy. This is great. And as a biracial person, I also think oftentimes we have been set up to be like we are half and half. And that is actually not true. Multiracial people are whole integrated people, or at least that is the goal, and that we can be wholly both. So I can be wholly both descended from Ashkenazi Jews and wholly both descended from Japanese Americans. And I think too that in the church, We are both and people. And so what I mean is we worship with people that we would not naturally hang out with. And when we take communion, for instance, or participate in any sacraments, we are being joined with people we would never have chosen to encounter or to be in community with, but we are bound together by these promises that God has made to us and that we in turn make to one another, which is part of what makes church awesome and also challenging. And so I would say that my framework is sort of threefold, that I have the theological, that we belong to God and to one another. We are all created in the image of God. It's not that some of us are more created in the image of God and others are less so, which we have been victims of that kind of thinking, of that disrupted, twisted incarnational theology, but that we should not be the ones to participate in that, to say that we are more legitimate than others simply because we think our theology is better. And I always remember the workers in the vineyard parable that Jesus told, that no matter what time the workers showed up, they were still compensated the same. And as someone who has done work earlier than a lot of other people did, like I have done like the feminist stuff, I have protested the occupation of Palestine years, I mean, decades ago, before other people showed up and realized what was happening, or who thought queer inclusion would be great way before other people showed up. That is like the binary. That is the either or. And that whenever people show up was the right time. And we are so grateful that they are here and we are doing this work in partnership. And that actually brings me to the second part of my framework, which is a little bit Saul Alinsky, a little bit Midwest Academy theories of community organizing. And one of those is that there are no permanent enemies. This, I think, is also a massive disruption to the binary, that oftentimes in organizing, there is the target and there is the us, and there is really not a lot of fluidity in that, I think, in a sort of caricatured essence of organizing, but that when we're doing community organizing, the idea really, truly is that we are bringing people over from wherever they are, and that we start with the people that we know are the most likely to come over, just figure out their motivations and see how we can make connections. But that ultimately anyone who wants to be a part of this really should, and that there is potential for transformation by everyone, which I think is also theological. And I think that also is like the both and, but from a community organizing perspective, which I love. And then the last part of the framework really comes from multiracial theory. So Maria P. Root, who is a psychologist, she wrote something called the Multiracial Bill of Rights. And this is something that I found pretty early on in some of my racial identity development work. And one section of it reads, I have the right not to keep the races separate within me, not to be responsible for people's discomfort with my physical or ethnic ambiguity, to change my identity over my lifetime and more than once, to have loyalties and identification with more than one group of people. And I found her Bill of Rights to be so helpful because I think that also really disrupts that binary of like, well, what side do you choose? Which is not a very healthy way to identify as a multiracial person. But to choose like your most integrated self is really the healthiest way to go about it. And I think that that also is such, if I am disrupting the binary in my being and how I present, then it only makes sense that as a practitioner, as someone who is working with people within Christian community, who want to do things a little bit better each day, that it has been really helpful to me. So if it's helpful to me, then maybe these same principles can apply to other people's lives, even if they are not multiracial. So in this way, in rejecting the either or, in rejecting the binary, we also reject demonization and dehumanization. Because if we say we do not believe in the binary, then that means we do not believe that other people are hopeless, or that other people are always going to be the enemy, or that other people are disposable. We've done so much work as Asian American Christian feminists to reclaim our value and the value of our people, that for us to then participate in the disposability of other people would be anathema, truly, to our own faith and to our own theology. And while I think that a lot of people sometimes think of Christianity as kind of the ultimate either or, right? Like the holy and the profane, the saved or the not saved, which is not something I worry about in my theology, but other people do have that in their theologies. That's not really the message of the gospel. There is the tax collector and the sex worker and the mother seeking healing for her child. There is the Jew and the Samaritan and the Gentile. There is the Creator and the Christ and the Spirit. And so I actually think that within the work that has already been done within this community, we have so much to offer to the world for its healing, but also so much to offer to one another, because all of us are prone to falling into these binaries in moments of frustration or fatigue, or times when we know we are being demonized, and to then participate in that. So thank you so much for thinking on this with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Laura, for so much thoughts. And I personally, like, as someone who is born in and raised in a cross culture, cross religious, national marriage. My dad is from Nepal. My mom is in Naga. So just having that multiplicity on my identity itself, yeah, you are a prophet who is preaching to me. So thank you so much for those rich thoughts. Our next panelist, I want to invite Kai to speak a little bit. You have done a lot of work on imagining and also building solidarity beyond particular identities. And also you have done a lot of work around how socialism and Christianity together can help provide that broader understanding of solidarity. So can you speak a little bit on that?
Sure. Thank you, Esther. Esther has like read everyone's bio and written work thoroughly, and then came out with like customized, tailored questions for us, which is very impressive. So I think my video might be lagging, so apologies if that's the case. So I can just try to repeat what I said. And I, similarly to Laura, I think you were talking a bit about what Panada means for you personally. I was inspired to share a little bit for myself, because I think one of the beauties of AAPI, or just Asian Christian spaces, is that it's probably one of the more like spaces that is the most like inflected by various religious traditions. Because I think most of us grew up in contexts in which it's common for Christianity not to be the only religion around, what have you. At least I remember reading that in one of Hope for Land's books. Religious diversity is something important. Also, I'm also a very fake AAPI feminist theologian. I actually don't really know much about this topic, but I can share on what Esther asked me to share about. So I'll stick to that. But yeah, I don't study theology. But my first Panadim conference, I think someone was opening up a prayer for everyone, and paused and said, we're going to take this moment to first pray and thank our ancestors in the space. And then it proceeded to then talk about, Christian people like Jesus. But I was like, it was a moment of me recognizing that, oh, this is a form of like ancestral acknowledgement, ancestral a line that I think I had internalized from childhood around like, you know, Asian Christians, particularly Chinese Christians, as a Chinese Malaysian person, Chinese Malaysian American person, you're not supposed to like worship ancestors. That's like what the non-Christians do. So just I really appreciate Panada just as a space to blur the binaries between religious traditions. And kind of picking up also on what Laura was saying about organizing. So I want to drop in the chat some of the articles I wrote because it might be helpful. They're really, really short, so it's like nothing too crazy. But just to give you a sort of more sense as to what I was talking about, I was and still am a member of DSA for a long time, but in particular, I also did a ton of reporting on these like really hardcore Chinese grandmas in Chinatown in New York City, who were really sort of pro-worker and I'm trying to find the link here. Oh, yeah, they went on a hunger strike at one point. It was pretty cool / scary. That they have to go down to the strike to this level. But one thing that I was particularly struck by when I was interacting with organizers, tenant organizers, worker organizers, is that when they saw me as a journalist, you know, college educated, all that stuff. Yeah, thanks, Grace. You know what I'm talking about. They were like, oh, you're a worker too, and worker occupational hazard. And sort of we're just saying like you and us, you know, even though there are many stark differences in class and some language, citizenship, that we are in the same boat. New York City has really high rents. Like we're all screwed by landlords for the most part, or real estate kind of industry. And that they very much understood, like, look, if you're going to organize with us, you have to organize for yourself too. Like this is about sort of collective liberation. It's not about helping, you know, nice Chinese grandmas, although that is also, you know, it would be nice to help them too. And that was very like made a really deep impression on me, and something that I really appreciate from talking to organizers in general, but particularly I think in like worker-centric spaces, is that the emphasis on solidarity is not because like be a nice person, so be in solidarity with us, although that's important. It's good to be nice and empathetic and compassionate, but it's really about understanding that we have perhaps different identities, but almost like a shared position in a larger structure, which is we all sort of collectively perhaps experience what it means to be at the whims and mercy of a landlord who might raise rent, you know, what have you, or the shared struggle of, you know, not owning the means of production, to use like a Marxist language, but just this sense of like, oh, this is a shared position we have of the capitalist elite. And that just really reminded me of Christianity for some reason. Like we are all sinners saved by God, like in the shared position of needing grace and mercy. And that reminded me of like taking communion, and this, you know, as Laura was saying, like we're different people are in church, you can't anticipate who they are. And so I think also it felt very familiar when I would be at DSA spaces and people would sing songs like hymns, you know, like worker comrade hymns. And that would be kind of the only other times outside of church where I would encounter collective singing on a group level. Oh God, I forgot to keep track of time. What is my time? Someone just messaged me. I think I'm maybe about halfway through. But I think there is, and so, you know, I still don't really quite understand what AAPI Feminist Theology is. I'm really here to learn from everyone on this panel what it is. But I think if it doesn't lead you to kind of think to work in solidarity for collective liberation with, like, I think of, for instance, Red Canary Song as an organizing group in New York City that organizes massage workers in Flushing, sometimes who engage in sex work, often are undocumented. That whatever AAPI feminist theology, if it doesn't lead you to that kind of organizing work, then it seems like not worth it. Just a hot take there. I think in my last like 2 minutes, I'm just guessing that's how much time I have left. I have, you know, the articles that Esther pointed out for me to talk about, I reported on several years ago, and I've had now a little bit of distance from it. I did a master's program, I'm in my second year of my PhD. And I think now that I've had a little bit of step back, there is the parallels I'm talking about are good, but there can also be bad. Like there in certain socialist circles, for instance, there is like can be an overemphasis on dogma and like believing the right things, and like, have you read your Marx? You know, it's like similar to like, have you read your Bible? And this, you know, so an idea of like a linear stage of progress that we must move towards. And, you know, for those of you who read Walter Mignolo, these are, you know, you could argue that Marxism, socialism is just like logic, or I'll just keep going. So I think over time I've started to take back and think about there's something sort of missing in some of those conversations. And in the past couple of years, a lot of our research has kind of taken a bit of a detour from that and looked a little bit more, although it's very related, but looked more closely at sort of indigenous. Oh, what I said about Mignolo. Oh, just that's, you know, part of decolonial thinking is thinking about how to change the terms of the conversation, the logic of the conversation, and not just the terms of the conversation. So if you think about, you know, Christianity has a certain logical formula, so to speak, one version of Christianity that is sort of linear progress. You have death, you know, resurrection, and then apocalypse where, you know, Jesus comes and everything's great. And he's like, we have to be careful that we don't just replicate similar logics, but we change the term. So you change Jesus with like the proletariat revolution, you know, or something like that. And so I do think there's a reason why there's a lot of parallels between the church and socialism, is all I want to say. But I think what both spaces in my experience have missed is actually a connection to the land and the environment. That really rarely came up in my conversations. And at that, all of my research now is looking at indigenous groups in Borneo and Malaysia. And I've talked with Ban at UTS on this. It's good to see you on the Zoom, Ban. But just thinking about their connection to back. Okay, nature. Oh my God, this needs to end soon, so I stop freezing up this program. But and realizing that is like another binary that we often sort of miss out, because we're thinking about binaries between people, because we want to think about solidarity, you know, resist the binaries of individualism. But there's also the binary between humans and land, humans and nature, that I feel like talking to people who identify as indigenous and who have a sort of traditional connection to land potentially is very illuminating. And my question, I think, for everyone, panelists, the group, is like, how do we feel there, how to make space for that within AAPI conversations? Because within the American context, those conversations tend to be like, oh, that's sort of Native Americans and, you know, we're AAPIs and blah, but actually within AAPI, there are people who identify as indigenous, also like Pacific Islanders is a good example, right? And who would see themselves potentially more in conversation with Native Americans than with Asian Americans. And I've talked to other people, you know, like my interlocutors in Borneo see themselves as part of the global indigenous community. They don't necessarily see themselves as part of the global Asian community, if that makes sense. So I feel like that's a challenge and wrinkle I would like us to kind of talk about together potentially. All right, my time is definitely up. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Kai. And we will come back to that question. And for now, I want to invite Angie to speak a little bit about whether the ways in which justice and theologies, all those things are in your own capacity, in your own role in church leadership as well as in academia, like how are these interacting, and what effective strategies have you encountered for countering the limitations imposed by such rigid frameworks, and also like if you can speak a little bit about your kinship commons. I was so excited to see that and the work that you are doing. What are the experiences and insight in designing the liturgies and gathering that embraces the complexity of really some of the things that also Kai was speaking about, like the complexity of marginalized experiences beyond the particular identities, right? So if you can take some time to talk about that.
Thank you so much, Esther. You did such a great job. You're really, really great. You did so much research on all of us. So thank you so much. I'm gonna start, I think, with the first thing that you mentioned, which is my work at the Duke Divinity School. I have this title called Director of Educational Programs, but it's a little misleading because I do no education or educational programs whatsoever. So they really should change that title. What I do is I oversee grants. I'm the money, and so the way that I want to kind of talk about this in terms of binary thinking, right, is my position was created while in conversation with some friends that were working at leadership education at the time. And they realized after, kind of more after pandemic lockdown, anti-Asian, like the height of all of that overexposure, they just really realized that they were not equipped to come alongside any Christian organizations or entities that were doing anything to even address or that were based in AAPI theological spaces, any community spaces, no faith spaces, and they saw that as a major problem. And at the same time, this granting organization is the Lilly Endowment, and they didn't know a lot of Asian Americans. There was only really maybe a handful of AAPI led projects that they had funded on the millions of dollar levels, and it was very small number. I mean, it was really one that's geared towards AAPI people at the time that I came on, and so they really didn't know what to do about it, and so they didn't know the people, but they knew that I knew some of the people. So this is why they brought me on. And I came on a little bit after I graduated with my MDiv from Duke. And what I got to really see is how API faith communities were applying their theological education, their training, their theory to practice in real life communities. And I will say I sit right there. I sit right there at that intersection because we want to come alongside these communities that are doing the work. But we see a lot of different kinds of expressions, but we see a lot of the same kinds of expressions that have more or less maybe born out of survival or more or less kind of assimilated into dominant culture. And so my job really is to help uplift organizations and people who are doing both theory and practice in an aligned way, and also to maybe plant seeds and maybe help to foster a sacred imagination. And so I have a cohort called Dreaming of Home. Kai is in it, Lisa Asadillo is in it, a bunch of other people are in it. And it's really a time for us to develop and spend time with each other and have that sort of critical connection over critical mass, to quote Grace Lee Boggs. But it's a time for us to really be with each other and develop sacred imagination. And hopefully, I hope that will filter into like real life standing projects. Penatum is one of our newer grantees, so is Progressive Asian American Christian. So I mean, we're making a little bit of progress, but that's the work that I do. So in terms of standing in the intersection of theory and practice, I'm right there, and I'm so honored to kind of witness it all and try to see how people put it together in creative ways. So that's my work there. And then my ministry experience started out in worship leading. I am a musician. I lead worship, and my very presence alone, being there, was very disruptive on many stages, many Christian conferences. And people were just really confused when they saw me, because they said, we know what white worship is, because that's called worship. That's just called worship. We know what Black like style Christian expressions of worship are, because we call that gospel. So we've got worship and we've got gospel. We've got gospel music. We might understand Latino music because we just sing in Spanish, you know. But what is Asian American worship? And I've just been, and so I like to confuse people. I actually really love it, because then I start interrogating the question itself, and I really use that as an opportunity, and I do rely very heavily on the things that I've learned through Panatum and all of the scholarly work that has been done in these theological spaces to really challenge these sort of assumptions of what it means to be Asian American, the sort of white black binary that exists in many Christian spaces, especially in expressions of the faith. I like to challenge and facilitate conversations on, you know, why are you even asking this question? And so at some point, right, people get really frustrated because all I do is confuse people and I give nobody any answers whatsoever. And I'm just myself. And representation is also very powerful in spaces like that. But I wanted to take it to the next level. And so that's why three other women of color and I started Kinship Commons. We are creating transformative experiences. We don't call it sort of a worship, you know, collective. We don't call it, we don't even say the word liturgy in our thing. We just call it transformative spiritual experiences because we want that imagination to expand. When people hear worship or when they hear liturgy, they have a certain kind of assumption in mind. And so we try to open that up. And for me, I just think back to one powerful experience that I had, you know, my first time at a labyrinth. I was barefoot. It was a beautiful labyrinth at this like, you know, very beautiful Christian retreat space. And it was like made out of stone. It was kind of fancy. It looked kind of expensive. And I loved, you know, I loved that experience. But it was, you know, it was an expensive structure at a Christian, you know, place. And there was money and investment towards it. But come to find out, right, that is a very pagan practice. It has pagan roots. And so for me, that's just one example that when it comes to us and like worship and expressions of faith, whether or not it's like about ancestors or integrating some of our cultural spiritual practices into our faith, all bets are off. All bets are off. And that's what we do at Kinship Commons. That's it.
Thank you so much, Angie. And our final panelist, I want to invite SueAnn. SueAnn, thank you so much for all the work that you have done and contributed. I really, really appreciated the conversation around in-betweenness in your documentary. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how this experience or this embrace of in-betweenness has implication for the way we understand belonging, and how does within various social and theological contexts, and how does it help us to continue to dismantle the binary?
Yeah, thank you so much for your work today and your reflections, Esther, and also thank you so much to all the other panelists who've gone before. It's an honor to be here with all of you tonight. I'm just going to open with a quote from John Calvin's Institutes, which is, "Without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God." And I think that's one of the things that we've been touching on today as we talk about what is AAPI feminist theology. Now, John Calvin is probably not a feminist and definitely not Asian, but it's a place to start and a dialogue to continue with. I think, you know, as I've been reflecting on your question about like what are the binaries that we come up against in our life, I think that from the day I was born here in the United States, as I was wrestling with this sense of self and growing up, you know, in Michigan in a place that didn't have a lot of Asian people, I did feel like a perpetual foreigner. I did feel like I didn't belong. And, also that there was a sense that there had to be something more to the world that I lived in than just what I was given. And I think that in a lot of ways is what led me to Christianity. I didn't grow up in a Christian family. I didn't grow up really going to church, but I was on this kind of journey to seek and to know more because I just felt there had to be more. And it was actually through knowledge of God that I can say that in many ways I came to knowledge of myself. This concept of a holy God that is like fully incarnational in a person, fully divine, fully human in Jesus Christ, embodying and destroying the binaries that we are so fixed in understanding. Like that is actually a huge part of how I came to know and grow and to have some of these things challenged for myself. I mean, I think early on I went to like all white churches I had my like non-Christian Asian family community, and then I had these really white churches. And as I was wrestling with this question of like, okay, well, God made me, God loves me. And why? Then why did I get put in this family, in this body, in this moment in time, in this place in the world? And of course, my 13-year-old self thought that I meant I was supposed to be a missionary and convert everyone in my family and in my community. But I think that through these are things that God has continually challenged me on in my walk. And for instance, one of the big things, the kind of a classic Asian American studies question is this, Asian versus American, almost having to pick a side. And I remember just when I was an undergrad and I was studying a lot of, feminist theory, queer theory, Asian American, African American studies work. I started to really push back at that idea that I had to choose a side. And that, for instance, if God didn't have to choose a side, then I didn't have to choose a side. Fully human, fully divine. I even remember having this conversation with my pastor around that time where I was talking about God being a balance of masculinity and femininity. And my pastor said, stop. No. And this is a PCA minister because I was involved in the PCA at the time. He said, no, God is not a balance or 50%, 50%. God is fully masculine and fully divine, fully feminine and fully masculine, right? In the same sense that God seeks full justice and full mercy, right? And I think that loops in this conversation that so many of the other panelists have talked about, which is there are no permanent enemies. What is solidarity? How do we reject dehumanization and demonization, right? And also these ideas of us versus them, the US interest versus the world, right? I didn't always identify as someone who was Taiwanese, but I went to Taiwan because I was like, I need to know where I come from. I need to know who I am. And I don't exist in a vacuum. This is my community. This is my relationships. And kind of fell in right at this right moment and right time with a movement of young people, a student movement called the Sunflower Movement. And New Bloom is a huge part. It came out of that movement. And we embody so much of these nuances, of these breaking of the binaries. For instance, historically, in leftist spaces, Taiwan has been seen as kind of a US imperialistic outpost. However, the struggle for Taiwanese independence really complicates that question because the main people who were resisting are actually the Taiwanese independence resisting Chinese nationalists in Chiang Kai-shek. And there's, of course, this binary we love from the Cold War, right? Communism versus capitalism, Christianity versus atheism. And in this movement, this democratic movement pushing to liberate Taiwan from military occupation, some of the most ardent leaders and voices in that work were Taiwanese Christians, right? Now we add on another layer, which is Taiwan being the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. So if Taiwan is supposed to embody this sort of like Western Christian capitalist ideal, then how is this supposedly the leader for gay rights in Asia? At New Bloom, we wrestle with all these questions, even the contradictions of homonationalism and also the realities of US imperialism. How can we be pro-Taiwan and also anti-China and anti-Chinese imperialism and anti-US imperialism, right? That's the place that we come from. That's our lived experience, right? Now, if we overly rely upon theory and these kind of ways of boxing the world into us versus them and this versus that, then we'll totally miss out on the realities of people who already exist, right? At the end of the day, whether people Taiwanese, Chinese, or something else altogether, when the bomb drop, when the bombs drop, it's not going to differentiate based on who voted KMT and who voted DPP and who voted TPP, right? But I think that for me, I found just this wonderful ideological home in the Sunflower Movement, which was a people of my own age, pro LGBT rights, pro feminist movements, pro independence, that said Taiwanese identity is no longer subjugated only for a certain kind of ethnic blood identity, but it's actually an identity of solidarity that we're all going to take on with each other, right? And not one, and also, I mean, to nuance it, there's issues of settler colonialism within especially old school Taiwanese identity politics. But I would say that within the new movement, especially in the Sunflower era and definitely in New Bloom's version of Taiwanese independence, the question of indigeneity and a settler colonial framework is actually core to our understanding of what a truly liberated Taiwan would be, right? These things are all like our ability, for instance, at the ballot to decide, okay, what kind of power are we going to use? Are we going to use nuclear power? Are we going to use coal? Are we going to use other kinds of, these always come back to the questions of the environment, the questions of our sovereignty, and the questions of our ability to sustain ourselves as we are people caught between two empires vying for control over us. Now, as to go back to my initial quote from John Calvin, I think that there are so many ways that I've learned about God through this journey of learning about my own identity, my own relationships, and how these things come up. But there's so much about the things that I've learned about God that have given me actually space to embrace the fullness of my own complexity and my own self, even when it doesn't fit into the categories that I've been given in this world. I remember the day that I came out to myself when I was 18 years old, and I was on a beach and praying and reading Sinclair Ferguson's Children of the Living God, which is about the doctrine of adoption. And I was so afraid. I was afraid because I had to admit something to myself that I felt like would displace my entire identity as a Christian, that I was not straight, that I was queer, that I was bisexual. And I remember praying to God, I don't even know who I am anymore. And then I heard God say, I have always known who you are. And so in knowing and loving God, I had the freedom to know and love myself because I had that acceptance and that relationship and that hope. And I think it's from that place of like, we love each other because God loved us first, that we can learn to love people who are different than us, to learn to accept and to see that our relationships, our needs, our fights are in solidarity, that our struggles are bound with one another, that I cannot love God if I don't love my brother or my sister. And I think that, these relationships, they're not defined by blood. Blood is a type of relationship, but it's not the only kind, right? And if that's a sense of what the possibilities of transnational solidarity are, of how our struggles are connected to each other, they start at the human to human level. But as we start to analyze and take them down, we'll realize that we don't just struggle against powers and principalities and right and flesh and blood, but that we're ultimately all within a war within ourselves, right? Now there's the inner jihad, the outer jihad, like all these kind of things. Obviously the political one's a reality, but if I can kind of go back to what Laura said, that there are no permanent enemies, right? That ultimately we are all fighting both for one another and for ourselves. And that as we come across this work, we're going to keep finding things in ourselves that are being challenged, just as other people are challenging within us. And I think that that is a witness to what the mission of the church is supposed to be and the call of discipleship from Jesus Christ in terms of the Great Commission. And that is the route to true justice and true peace. And perhaps that, that mercy is, which feels so counter, mercy feels so counter to our sense of what justice is. But that is also the heart of what an abolitionist vision for our world is as well. I didn't really get to talk a lot about my work, whether that's like my film, my music, or some of my other works. But I mean, those are all out there. So if people want to read my op-eds or listen to my music, or if you want to watch my film, you can just message me through my website and get the link for that. But all the things I've shared today, those are some of the underlying things that are motivating my work, that have informed the vision and the direction that I've taken them. And in many ways liberated me to say some hard things with my chest that maybe people say it doesn't exist, but I'm going to make something. I'm going to write something. I'm going to sing something, and I'm going to tell a story in all of its nuances and all of its complexity, and let God do the rest. So I think I'm over my time, but let's close with that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for oh my God, for just this vision of collective liberation, for this just invitation to embrace the difference within, and with that, the hope that we will accept and love and embrace the difference without as well. And so thank you so much to all our panelists for sharing all those wisdom, insight, and strategies. I am looking at, so because I was so involved in what you were sharing, I didn't have the chance to look at the Q&A. But okay, maybe we can begin by also giving a chance to the panelists here. You all have thought about this topic, you have heard each other. If you have questions for each other, you want to supplement some of the points that people have touched on, because I know like you complement each other a lot in your work and your thinking. So just wanted to give some time as well to the panelists to respond to each other.
I just want to thank you and everyone in the panel, and just so moving to listen to your narratives, your own life experiences and the space you belong to, how you embody, the breaking binaries and challenge white supremacist thinking and colonial thinking. So it was just so moving, and I was so touched by all your narratives. Thank you.
So I have a question. Oh, sorry.
No, I loved hearing everyone's kind of take on the different questions that you had posed for us to discuss. That was really fun for me. And when Angie said this thing like all bets are off, that's something that I thought it's like such a good encapsulation of some of what everybody talked about. That the impression that I am getting of the collective work represented here, which I think is like just a small piece of all the cool stuff Pan-Autumn people are doing, is just this like generous, expansive, fierce, beautiful work. And that was really awesome for me to hear.
Thank you.
I was gonna also respond because I just want to give a shout out to Angie because, you know, as she shared, she was asking this question, what is Asian American worship? And I'd be really remiss if I didn't share that, you know, she asked this question very publicly, very vocally, and it was actually her pushing this that led me to record my first album. And I've shared this story multiple times, Angie, and you always forget it. But we were at the Women of Color retreat in LA in 2017, and you were talking about this question of like what is the church missing when our voices as Asian American women and worship leaders is absent from the chorus. And it led me to really think about, again, what does Asian American worship mean? It's not really a straightforward answer. But for me, it was like, this is not a question you answer by talking. This is a question you answer by doing. And so that kind of led me to be like, okay, well, I'm an Asian American woman and I'm queer, and I'm going to worship in the way that feels right to me, not in the way that I think other people are trying to pigeonhole or expect me to. And you know, the most obvious low hanging fruit for that is people always want us to sing in an Asian language, and they're like, there are more ways of expressing our relationships, our creativity than like really tired essentialist tropes and Orientalism. Please, no more Orientalism in in the music. Thank you.
I didn't forget, SueAnn, okay? Thank you so much for sharing that. And if y'all haven't gotten SueAnn's, if y'all haven't listened to SueAnn's album, I love it. It's so I love to there are some ones that are just so hauntingly beautiful and haunting in the lyrics and the way that you sing them, because they're a lot of them are hymns or traditional sort of hymns, but the way that you sing them is just so beautiful. So thank you so much for that work. I think to your point, I mean, whenever people ask, like any of us, you know, like what is Asian American theology? What is Asian American preaching? I've been asked this multiple times, so I'm guessing that a lot of us have too. And I think there's something that I learned in Asian American theology when I was in school about this like concept of coercive mimeticism, where it's sort of like a zookeeper, right? That has like different sort of cages at a zoo, and you've got the lion and tigers and bears, and you say to the lion like, be a lion, like roar like a lion, and bear, and but like everybody's in cages, and you're only as useful as you are entertaining and all at serving the zoo master. And that's kind of how I was starting to feel. I was starting to feel like a caricature. I was starting to feel like like I felt some sort of, I mean, yes, tokenism for sure, but it went deeper than that. I was asked to sort of like define for all Asian Americans, like what it meant to be and that just always cracks me up, because it's like, really? I mean, and at some point I was like, I'm not going to pressure myself. I'm going to resist this whole thing. This essentialism, this like coerciveness in acting or being Asian American. Like we can be us, and we are hybrids. If I'm second gen Korean American, so I feel like I have so many different sorts of experiences, but I am Asian and I am American, like I am all those things. So um my experience and my expression is no more valid than any other. Anyway.
Yeah, and actually what's so interesting is like my next album, I'm starting production on it soon, is like specifically talking about the issue of land and communion, and how the relation like worship as a communal experience, not just that is that of an individual, and how our worship and what it means is transformed both by people and like the specificity of like land and place. So it's been an interesting creative opportunity to kind of explore again, to engage with that question, but not necessarily in words, but in doing. right? So hopefully, whatever comes next, I can kind of talk about it by not talking about it.
I'm not really sure. Chin Young forwarded me this question in the Q&A, but I don't know. I can read it, but can I read it? Should I? I don't know. In the Q&A, should I, Esther? Or
yes, you can read it, or we can also invite SueAnn to read it. Shall
I'm
I
sorry.
invite SueAnn to read the question for SueAnn has a question for us in the Q&A. If SueAnn is here and maybe can unmute and read the question for us or share the question for all of us to consider.
Sure. Hi. It's funny because I was trying to make it a question because it was really more a comment. And let me pull it up because So thank you everyone for what you shared. And I say that over the years I've like dipped my toe in and out of Pan Autumn and had various levels of feeling belonging or not in the Pan Autumn space. And as a Korean adoptee, that's where I felt like a lot of the like push and pull. But as a Korean so many perspectives shared tonight have resonated and been very inviting and felt connecting. So in the question is, I'm just curious if your experiences, you panelists is your experience that these kinds of spaces are rare for you? And if not, where are you experiencing spaces like this in other places?
Go ahead. You go. I already talked a bunch.
Okay, fine. I'll try it. I actually think it's not altogether too rare for me to find these spaces, but I think it's also because I tried to create them that I experienced other people trying to create spaces for me and trying to invite me into spaces. And I am no longer a young adult, so it's my job now. And so I think that's kind of what I try to do, I'm sure with varying levels of success.
Thank you.
SueAnn, do you want to also add?
Yeah, I would say that for me, I think I don't have a lot of places in my life where I feel like all of myself gets to fully exist all the time. Whenever I'm in a space with certain people, like there are things that connect and there are things that feel resonant. But then sometimes other things maybe kind of like go a little bit more on the back burner. And then I'll be in a different place and it kind of switches up. I think that has been difficult, right? It's felt very lonely in a lot of ways. And I am really thankful for the places and the people where I get to find those little bits of respite. I think that what's been really important for me in the absence of like just a place where I was like, well, this is my place and I exist and I belong here forever and there's no question about it. Like, I think that relationships of safety are so important. And that is that like the intimacy of like knowing and loving a person, whether that's like your friendship or your partner, somebody who can really like receive the wholeness of who you are. Um, and I think that that's like sometimes those are people who share certain aspects of our identities, and sometimes those are not. And I think that that's kind of the befuddling point of it. There's been times where I've been in a room full of, other Asian people, and then I didn't feel like I belonged, right? Or especially because like, or I'm a Christian or I'm in a Christian space, and then like maybe I don't feel like I belong, or this or that, or maybe I, sometimes in a place where everyone's different than me, but then we found something to connect. So I think for me, I just try to celebrate the joy and the connection that I can where I can. And also, I don't know that I feel like it's necessary for me existentially to find some sort of aspirational perfection either. I think that's actually one thing that my relationship with God helps me with is like, because I feel totally known and totally loved and accepted by God. I no longer have to like kind of put this burden on other people to affirm my like humanity. Though it's great. I would love it if more people affirmed my humanity. Um, Not saying no to that. But I think that is one thing that's been able to carry me through and bridge that sense of gap between places. I know that's not everyone's experience with religion or faith or even God. But I think for me, because I think that God has been my faithful companion in a way, because I've often felt like that inability to have people or places or communities that could move with me as much as I was going to be moving. So
I think I resonate a lot with just SueAnn said, I don't think I have sort of, expectation or aspiration for a perfect community that I feel like I fully belong. But speaking about Panada, I would say instead of being rare, it's distinct and unique, in which we can, share our stories and our personal experiences can be transformed into knowledge. And also when pains and struggles living here without, certain, fixed identities, there are a lot of overlaps we can find each other, and we can make it more, intellectual conversations and making something constructive. So I think in that way, Penatam is a unique space.
Thank you. Thank you for those thoughts. It is 9:23 now. We have probably 7 minutes to end our conversation here. But so one concluding questions that I want to put forward for all of you to share is like, could you share a practice that is nourishing your soul, that is nourishing your commitment to do this collective liberative work? It is a hard work. And community building is hard, it is messy, and yeah, like, so what nourishes that commitment of yours? What nourishes you to continue to do this work? If you can share that, maybe. Yeah.
So I don't know if it's because I lived in the South for 14 years or what, but I talk to strangers. And that's just it. Like, I talk to strangers, which I realized I think it's a practice now. I just do it. And not everyone loves it, obviously, because I no longer live in the South. But just that like moment of human connection for me has helped me in the past. If like I've been struggling and someone said something nice to me or whatever. And so sometimes that's what I do, because the only way we're going to combat alienation, I mean, to be clear, I do choose my strangers. But the way to combat alienation and segregation is to disrupt the typical boundaries or like the walls that we might have. So, and I keep the expectations light. I just helped an elderly woman open her plastic like bag today so she could get her produce in. I'm picky, but that apparently is my thing now.
Okay, that gave me inspiration. All right, so I literally just had spiritual direction this morning, and I was talking to my director about something that had nourished me. And it was going to a worship service that was from a different religion. Um, because I'm a pastor, because I lead worship and I preach, and this is a huge part of my work. So there's a lot of stress actually in like sometimes going to another like Christian service, because for you have your internal thoughts and reflections, and I would have done this differently, or judgments or whatever. And for me, it's like I like to go to worship services of my friends who are, especially not Christian, because it's such an invitation to learn and to wonder and to curiosity, and for me it's a way that I actually feel like I can be very vulnerable, because I'm not in a place where people are looking to me for leadership, and so it's been very nourishing, and I really really love going to worship services from other religions. Yeah. So
I think like what nourishes me, maybe I'm just like a sucker for connection. I just have to feel connected. Like even being here on this, I'm not with y'all in person, but like SueAnn, I remember like the day that I met you. I remember your like smiley face. I remember us laughing like really loudly together, and crying together and being on podcasts together and being on our text thread, Unfriendly Asian Hotties together. Kai, I remember like exactly when I met you during the Penautumn gift exchange where we were sweating because we were so nervous because we didn't know if our gifts would be like acceptable, which they weren't because I forgot mine. But we were like laughing, and I just like I have distinct memories with so many people, and I think it's unfriendly Asian hotties, Grace. Get it right. Unfriendly Asian hotties. And so I feel like staying connected is really important. And like Laura, I don't mind reaching out to people on the internet and just DMing them, sliding people's DMs and just being like, I think that's actually how I met you, Laura. I'm pretty sure. So I don't mind doing that. But it's like having these connections really is like an oasis in I live in the South. There's not a lot of people around me. I don't have a lot of conversation partners. It's tough. I'm no longer, in school, so I don't have a regular rhythm of seeing people. And that's what this sort of stuff nourishes me. Yes, and eating hot pot with Grace. That was unspicy, but she said it's because I was Korean. So.
Yeah, some of the things I do in my teaching space, my institution, Georgetown, is kind of, sort of solution-based thinking and success-oriented. It's just deeply embedded in the student's mindset. So through my classes, I try to create many different, practices I can do with students. So one of the practices I do this semester is that I named interconnected mantra practice, mantra making. So it's like focusing on attention to a living being and location awareness and building relationship with your chosen living being. So I ask students to choose not just any living being around you. It could be just a person. It could be a plant. It could be even atomic liver. I mean, anything you can feel sort of energy, living energy. And then for 4 weeks of process, they have to give intentional attention to their partner, their living being, and then writing journal and study that living being, and then create just a short mantra that they can come back to the relationship with the living being every time, and then present their work and they share it with the class. So, I also join the practice, and throughout the process, I mean, I see that students actually build a relationship with them, and they share a lot about just unique experiences, just living with them, being aware of surroundings. So that's one of the practices I do.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and the practices. And I can say that for me, this conversation will be the nourishment for me for in the days to come. It will nourish me as I continue to participate in community building and imagine collective liberation. So thank you so much, each one of you, for being here. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience, for participating, for listening, for engaging. Their details, their details are there on the chat if you want to reach out to anyone to continue the conversations. So thank you so much and have a pleasant night. And it was an honor to be part of this conversation with you all.
Thank you, Esther, for hosting.